I believe many of you share the memory of that heavy cast iron frame with the famous Zinger logo. I always thought it was some sort of grandfather's trophy from the Second World War era. Zinger sounds and feels to me like a reputable German company from the beginning of the last century. Except it's not German, and it's not from the beginning of the last century, but rather from the middle of the century before, which predates electricity. But did you know that thanks to Zinger, we have the world as we see it today? The company has contributed to modern leasing financing models. It invented so-called paid pulse and pioneered in modern chains of stores and so much more. It implemented so many management innovations that it's hard to find a single book on management today that wouldn't contain foundations that were laid by the Zinger. But what I found even more interesting about Zinger is the fact that it was founded by people who couldn't stand each other. It's a story how friends betray each other when they are most vulnerable. It's a story that taught me that success is unfortunately not always a result of hard work, but often a result of a good presentation skills. When preparing this material, I realized that telling only the story of the company turned into a massive list of inventions, which deserves a separate video. Yet at the same time, I found the life of one of the company founders so contradicting to what the company did that I've decided to split the story into two. And this part is about Isaac Mirit Zinger, the founder of the company Zinger. Now for me, sewing business is a deeply personal story. I was born and raised in a family of entrepreneurs who founded and ran a sewing factory and owned several clothing brands. So when I stumbled upon a Zinger as a potential topic for my video, I didn't think twice. I wanted to know more. If you're new here, I'm Jeff Tiley and I explore how businesses operate, how they influence our culture, and everything happening in between. If you enjoy videos that explain the world behind the brands, hit subscribe and give this video a like so it reaches more people. Let's jump to the story. Isaac Mirit Zinger gave the company its name, yet his real dream was the stage. He wanted to be a Shakespearean actor and spent his life performing, but never managed to make that career work. For decades, he drifted, chasing money, fixing and modifying machines on the side, searching for something that would finally hit. And the breakthrough came in 1850s with a sewing machine design that actually worked, a success made possible mostly by a business partner he couldn't stand. Zinger's life fits the old line. He had no enemies, but even his friends didn't like him. To understand Mr. Zinger, we have to circle back to his origins. Isaac Zinger was born in 1811 in Pittstown, New York, the youngest child of Adam and Ruth Zinger. His father, a German immigrant with Jewish roots, and his mother, raised in Quaker tradition, separated when Isaac was about 10. Now, Quakers are members of Christian movement that emerged in 17th century in England. They reject formal clergy, emphasize interpersonal faith, and follow strict principles of simplicity, honesty, pacifism, and equality. Their communities are known for plain living, silent worship, and strong involvement in social reform. Living in Oswego at the time, Isaac Zinger watched his mother leave the family permanently, an experience that likely shaped his attitude towards women later in life. By 12, conflict with his stepmother pushed him to run away to Rochester, then a fast-growing Erie Canal town. He spent the next 7 years there working in a mechanic's shop. At 18, he was already proud enough of his abilities to claim he picked up the trade in just a few months while studying during the winters. Mechanical work did not satisfy him. Theater pulled him in, even though many people disapproved theaters, seeing them as something of low morale and sometimes even banning them. At 1830, when he was 18, he joined a traveling troupe and started a restless life on the road. People who saw him then described a tall, blonde, charismatic young man who enjoyed playing King Richard. Money was scarce, and he survived by taking any temporary work he could secure. Isaac's personal life followed a pattern of concealment, impulse, and constant motion. In 1830, he married 15-year-old Catherine Haley. They had 2 children and remained legally tied for the next 30 years. The marriage existed mostly on paper because he kept leaving home, chasing theater work, and odd mechanical jobs. Local newspapers criticized what they called his inappropriate closeness with women wherever he traveled, and that criticism was accurate. In Baltimore, he met Mary Ann Sponsler. He didn't tell her the fact that he already had a wife. He courted Mary Ann, convinced her family he was free to marry, and got engaged. They moved to New York and began a family. The first child was born in 1837. 9 more followed, though they lost 2 at birth. Zinger introduced Mary Ann to everyone as Miss Zinger, and the city accepted the name without hesitation and background checks. People believed she was his lawful partner. She never was. This pattern repeated. While maintaining his household with Mary Ann, he built others. By the late 1850s, he kept 4 separate homes operating at once across Manhattan. Each woman believed she was in a committed relationship with him. Each household had children, and by 1860 he had 16 surviving children with 4 different women. Later, after leaving the United States, he added 6 more with Isabella Bayer in England, the woman he finally made his legal wife, which brings us to Isaac's professional life. Isaac kept chasing inventions, hoping one of them would turn into real money. In 1839, he built a rock drill and sold the patent for $2,000. The money disappeared almost immediately. Next, he designed a carving machine for wooden type. Now, wooden type was big printing letters made out of wood. Printers used them for posters and headlines because metal letters that size were too heavy and too expensive. Craftsmen normally carved each letter by hand, which was slow, fuzzy work. Zinger's carving machine for wooden type was his attempt to automate that job. Instead of a craftsman cutting every curve and angle, the machine would shape the letters faster and more consistently. It was one of his many attempts to find a shortcut to wealth long before he ever touched a sewing machine. However, nothing he did turned into lasting income. By 1849, at 37, he was back in New York trying again, long past the age when most men with real prospects had already secured them. The same year, Isaac was looking for investment to continue his work on his carving machine. He met George Zieber, who was a Philadelphia publisher, which we're gonna talk about in a moment. He loaned him $1,700 to keep the carving machine project alive. That push for cash and workable idea sent him to Orson's Phelps machine shop in Boston, where a sewing machine that finally changed his life will take shape. Along with relocating himself, he brought his family to Boston and kept working on his carving machine just as the market for such tools collapsed because wooden type was being replaced by metal. At the same period, Phelps' workshop had started producing sewing machines. The basic idea had emerged in Europe, but early adoption stalled because sewing guilds fought to protect their trades. Several inventions in America pushed the technology forward, yet none had produced a machine that was dependable or commercially viable. Zinger's business partners pushed him to study the models coming out Phelps's shop to see whether he could improve them. His first reaction was contempt. He viewed sewing machines as a minor trade, beneath his skills. He also repeated the common belief of the time that sewing machines would leave women nothing to keep them occupied. He mocked the device and dismissed the task, but he needed money. His view was direct. The innovation did not interest him, income did, so he finally turned his attention to sewing machine. Zieber and Phelps deserve a proper introduction because the early Zinger story wasn't a one-man act. Edward Zieber was the rare investor willing to stake money on Isaac's chaotic talent. He wasn't a mechanist or inventor. He was the steady, practical partner who kept the venture funded, managed the paperwork, and pushed Zinger to stay focused long enough to turn rough ideas into real projects. Orson Phelps, on the other hand, owned the machine shop where all experimentation happened. He supplied the workspace, the tools, and the technical discipline that Zinger, whose strengths leaned toward improvisation rather than method, badly needed. Together, Zieber's capital pressure and Phelps's workshop and mechanical know-how formed the structure around Isaac's creativity. And in 1850, Zieber, Zinger, and Phelps entered into a three-way business arrangement, which was never formalized, however, which later left Phelps with no stake in the company. Working almost without pause, Zinger and Zieber produced a machine that actually functioned well, stable, durable, and thoughtfully built. It introduced several decisive improvements, including a more practical layout and a redesigned needle that solved many earlier flaws. By 1851, the machine reached the market, aimed first at garment manufacturers and wealthy households. Zinger's loud, theatrical nature still carried traces of his old stage ambitions. He turned every demonstration into a performance. He shouted the song of the shirt and promoted the machine with the energy of a showman. The productivity leap was extraordinary. A men's shirt that once required 14.5 hours of hand labor could now be completed in just over an hour. Historians often rank the sewing machine among the most consequential inventions of the 19th century. However, with a price tag of $125, which is roughly $4,000 in today's money, early sales moved slowly. But slow sales were only part of the problem. The moment Zinger's machine reached the market, the company collided with a far more corrosive threat: endless litigation. Dozens of investors claimed they had created essential parts of the sewing machine long before Zinger, and every one of them wanted payment. Patent disputes piled up faster than customers. Court orders blocked productions, competitors filed injunctions, and the company spent more time fighting in legal offices than selling to factories. Now, the early sewing machine industry wasn't a race to innovate. It was a knife fight over who owned the right to sew a straight line. Without resolving that conflict, no amount of engineering brilliance or showmanship could save the business. Discouraged by the slow pace of early sales and patent wars, Zinger tried to sell off his stake for $1,500. Edward Zieber stopped him, insisting the venture had still future. At that exact turning point, a new figure entered the story: Edward Clark, a lawyer just 2 months younger than Zinger, who stepped into to manage the escalating patent battles. Clark's legal talent and business discipline revealed themselves almost immediately. He brought order to the company's chaotic finances, organized the patent strategy, and imposed a level of structure that Zinger had never managed on his own. Yet that same competence intensified the internal friction. The partnership among Zinger, Edward Zieber, and Edward Clark was strained from the start. Zieber had put up early money and worked beside Zinger in the workshop, but he lacked Clark's legal authority and Zinger's showman charisma. As the business grew more complex and the stakes higher, Zinger and Clark increasingly saw Zieber as expendable. The opportunity came when Zieber fell seriously ill. While he was confined to his bed, Zinger told Clark that the doctor expected Zieber not to recover. Zinger then reportedly carried his claim to the negotiations, presenting the situation as urgent and irreversible. The two men used that manufactured crisis to pressure Zieber into selling his 1/3 stake for $6,000, a fraction of its true value even at that early stage. Now, Zieber eventually recovered, only to discover he had been pushed out of the enterprise he helped finance and physically build, but the worst part, by the man he convinced not to leave the company. From his perspective, Zinger and Edward Clark had exploited his illness to seize the stake at a price far below its worth, and he was right. His resentment settled immediately and permanently into hatred. Yet the buyout stood, and the partnership reorganized into two equal owners, Zinger and Clark. But rather than stabilizing the firm, the new structure deepened the internal rot. Zinger distrusted Clark because Clark's calm, methodical style exposed Zinger's impulsiveness and financial recklessness. Clark, on the other hand, distrusted Zinger because he had seen firsthand the lengths Zinger would go in order to get his way, including the deceit used against Edward Zieber. According to several later accounts, Clark quietly admitted that he regretted participating in the removal of Zieber. It had given him a stronger position in the company, but it also tied him to a partner he neither respected nor believed he could ever fully trust. The company moved forward with these two men locked together, equal in ownership, opposed in temperament, and bound by a decision that had poised their working relationship from the outset. Their collaboration generated enormous commercial success, but it rested on a foundation of bitterness and suspicion that never truly faded. Over time, Clark proved far more capable than anyone expected. The company's stability began with a major legal settlement in 1856. As the three dominant sewing machine manufacturers, Wheeler and Wilson, Brewer and Baker, and the Zinger firm, fought each other in court, Clark negotiated a groundbreaking agreement to pool and share their patents. This arrangement, the first true patent pool in industrial history, reached each company to pay $15 per machine for access to all essential patents. It ended what the press called the sewing machine wars and became a model later adopted in industries such as automobiles and radio. Once legal battles ended, growth accelerated with astonishing speed. The company sold 13,000 machines in 1860, overtook its two major rivals by 1867, and reached 127,000 units sold by 1870. However, soon Clark realized the limitations of the factory market and the high price of the machines and directed his energy towards the home users. Given the cost, he developed a program where people could rent the machines with a small monthly payment and own them after a period of time. This was the first use of installment payments by a major American company, fundamentally giving a birth to modern consumer credit. Clark also revolutionized distribution. He realized independent sales agents often sold competitors' models, so he switched to using only people who represented Zinger exclusively, training them to demonstrate the machines. The company opened hundreds of offices across the states, creating one of the earliest retail chains in US history. We will talk in more details about Mr. Clark and his management innovations in the second episode of this series. For now, let's jump back to another founder. While Isaac Zinger spent money freely and lived without restraint, at one point riding around in the largest carriage in town fitted with beds and even toilet, Edward Clark kept strengthening the company with cautious planning and steady management. Zinger's personal life soon created enough scandal to drive him out of the country. After a public fight with Mary Ann, who learned he was involved with yet another mistress, he faced accusations of bigamy and adultery. He left the United States after divorcing his legal wife, Catherine, and resettled in England. Just to remind you that Mary Ann was not his legal wife. He technically was still married to Catherine, who I mentioned in the beginning of the video. In England, he married Isabella Boyer, who is said to have inspired the face of the Statue of Liberty, and had 6 more children with Isaac. Zinger and Clark never hid their dislike for each other. One was loud and theatrical, the other quiet and restrained. When the company needed a president, neither wanted the other in the job. According to the story, they told each other, "You can be the president if I can be the president." And they chose a young office employee instead. Isaac married Zinger, passed away in 1875 at 63, leaving an estate valued at $13 million. Well over 300 million in today's terms. He was buried in England and left his vast fortune to his 24 children, which allowed Clark to finally take the role of the president of the company. 7 years later, Edward Clark passed away as well. His estate reached $25 million. After both founders passed away, the company continued to grow. Improvements in mass production reduced the price of the sewing machine from $125 to $100, then $60, and eventually as low as $30. Lower prices opened the market to ordinary households for the first time. Massive factories in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and later in Clydebank, Scotland, produced machines at a scale never seen before. This marked the end of the era of 2 founders that hated each other, yet it was only the beginning for the company. By the early 20th century, the company manufactured more than 2 million machines each year. Some estimates place its market share at 80% of global production well into the 1920s. To signal its dominance, the company built the Zinger Building in New York City. It opened in 1908 as the tallest skyscraper in the world, rising more than 600 feet. Abroad, the firm constructed its ornate Russian headquarters in St. Petersburg, known as the Zinger House. Because the city limited building heights, the architects placed a glass globe on the roof. Before the Bolshevik Revolution, the building briefly housed the American embassy. Today, it remains one of the city's most recognizable landmarks and serves as the home of the Dom Knigi bookstore. By 1920s, the company operated 1,700 stores in the United States and more than 4,000 overseas, supported by a sales force of 60,000 men. The enterprise that Isaac Zinger once tried to quit for $1,500 had become a global industrial power. The story continued into the 1960s when the company joined the era's corporate merger wave. It expanded into calculators, aerospace, and defense, and its sales passed $2 billion by 1969. Over time, the sprawling structure lost direction, and in the 1980s, the company was broken apart by corporate raiders, and the sewing machine division was eventually sold. There's so much more to this story, and I will cover the rest in the second part of this series. So make sure to subscribe to not miss the next episode. Which makes me wonder, do you have this legendary Zinger machine at home? Did you inherit one of those as well? Or maybe you have an interesting story to share about this machine? Let me know in the comments below. On that note, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like to this video, subscribe to my channel to not miss my next videos, and see you next time. Peace.